Queen Velara stood motionless outside the medical chamber, her tall, elegant form casting a long shadow across the polished floor, and the soft blue light that normally glowed beneath her scales had faded to almost nothing, a sign that every member of her species would recognize as deep and terrible grief. For 14 days, her youngest daughter had refused to eat, and in those 14 days, the most powerful ruler in the known galaxy had discovered that all her power meant nothing at all. The medical chamber before her was filled with the finest technology that 12 star systems could provide, and inside that chamber her little Kira lay in a nutrient pod, her small body growing weaker with each passing hour, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow, her scales losing their shimmer one day at a time. "My queen," said Chief Physician Torvax as he stepped out of the chamber, his 4 arms folded in the gesture of helplessness. "We have tried everything we know to try, and I must tell you with great sorrow that we still do not understand why the princess will not eat." Velara turned her dark eyes toward him, and in those eyes was a fury born not of anger but of desperation, the kind of fury that comes when a mother watches her child slip away and can do nothing to stop it. "You have had 14 days, she said, her voice cold and sharp like breaking ice. "I have brought you physicians from the Andorian Medical Collective, specialists from the Neural Institute of Vega Prime, and even a psionic healer from the Forbidden Temples of Kethros, and you tell me that none of you can explain why a 6-year-old child will not eat." Torvax lowered his head because he had no answer to give, and what could he say when the truth was so terrible? When the truth was that Princess Kira was dying and nobody knew how to save her. "The princess is not physically ill," he said quietly. "Her body is capable of accepting nutrition, her digestive system functions normally, and there is no disease or parasite or genetic defect that we can find. But when we place food before her, she simply turns away. And when we try to feed her through tubes, she becomes so distressed that her vital signs become dangerous." The queen closed her eyes for a moment and remembered the day everything changed. The day 3 weeks ago when Muravel had died. Muravel, who had been Kira's bonded nursemaid since the day of her birth. Muravel, who had fed her and held her and sung to her every night. Muravel, whose heart had simply stopped beating without warning or explanation. Kira had been in the room when it happened, had been sitting on Muravel's lap eating her morning meal when Muravel's arms went limp and her body fell still, and the child had not stopped screaming for hours. After that day, Kira had refused to eat, and no one could reach her, not her mother, not her siblings, not the therapists or the physicians or anyone at all. In a different part of the palace, far below the gleaming towers and royal chambers, a cargo shuttle was docking at the service port, its hull scratched and dented from years of hard travel between the outer colonies and the core worlds. The shuttle's door opened with a hiss of pressure equalization, and a human male stepped out onto the metal platform, his boots heavy, his shoulders tired, his face lined with the marks of a difficult life. His name was Marcus Cole, and he was 53 years old, and he had come to the Theshan royal palace to work as a janitor. He carried only a single duffel bag containing everything he owned, which was not much, a few changes of clothes, some personal items, a photograph of his late wife Sarah, who had passed away 2 years ago, and a lunch tin that she had given him on their 20th anniversary. The station supervisor, a reptilian being with orange scales and impatient eyes, looked at Marcus with barely hidden contempt. "You are the new sanitation technician?" the supervisor asked, and Marcus nodded, and the supervisor made a sound that might have been a sigh. "Humans, always humans, you breed like insects and you are everywhere now. But I suppose you will do. The lower corridors have not been properly cleaned in months and no one else wants the job." Marcus did not react to the insult because he had heard worse in his years of traveling from world to world, working whatever jobs he could find, trying to outrun the grief that followed him like a shadow. "Just show me where to start," he said, and his voice was calm and steady, and the supervisor handed him a cleaning kit and a map of the palace's lower levels. "Stay out of the upper floors," the supervisor warned. "Those areas are for important people, not for human janitors, and if you cause any trouble you will be sent back to whatever colony you came from." Marcus took the kit and the map and said nothing more, and he began to walk toward the lower corridors where no one important ever went. As he walked, he passed windows that looked out onto the vastness of space, and he saw nebulae burning with colors that had no names in any human language, and he saw ships moving like silver fish through the darkness between stars, and he thought about how strange it was that the universe could be so beautiful and so lonely at the same time. He did not know that somewhere above him a queen was weeping in silence, and he did not know that a little girl was dying for reasons no one could understand, and he did not know that in just a few days his life would change in ways he could never have imagined. He was just a janitor after all, just a human being with a mop and a broken heart, and a lunch tin that reminded him of someone he had loved. But sometimes the universe has a way of putting ordinary people in extraordinary places, and sometimes the smallest and most forgotten person in the room is the one who changes everything. Marcus Cole began to clean the floors, and above him the lights of the palace glowed like captured stars, and somewhere in the medical chamber a little princess lay silent and still, waiting without knowing it for a stranger who would teach her how to live again. Marcus had been working at the palace for 5 days when he first heard the crying. He was cleaning a corridor that seemed to have been forgotten by everyone, a long, narrow hallway near the old observatory that no one had visited in what looked like years, and the dust lay thick on every surface, and the lights flickered with the tiredness of machinery that had not been maintained. He pushed his mop across the floor and hummed a song that Sarah used to sing, an old Earth song about rivers and mountains and going home, and the sound of his own voice was the only company he had in this lonely place. Then he heard it, soft and broken, the sound of someone crying. Marcus stopped and listened, and the crying continued, small hitching sobs that echoed through the ventilation shaft above his head, and he knew that sound, he knew it in his bones, because it was the sound of a child in pain. He set down his mop and followed the noise, walking slowly and quietly so as not to frighten whoever was making it, and the corridor led him to a junction where an old maintenance hatch had been left slightly open. He knelt down and looked inside, and there in the dusty darkness of the crawlspace he saw a small figure huddled against the wall, a child with pale silver scales and eyes that glowed faintly purple in the dim light. She was tiny, perhaps the size of a human 6-year-old, and she was so thin that Marcus could see the shape of her bones beneath her skin, and she was crying with the kind of exhaustion that comes when you have been sad for so long that you have forgotten how to be anything else. The child looked up when she sensed his presence, and her eyes went wide with fear, and she pressed herself back against the wall as if trying to disappear into it. "Please," she whispered, and her voice was so weak that Marcus could barely hear it. "Please do not tell them where I am. They will make me go back. They will try to make me eat again." Marcus did not move closer because he could see that she was terrified, and he understood that whatever was happening to this child was beyond anything he could fix with words alone. So instead of speaking, instead of asking questions or making demands, he simply sat down on the floor across from the hatch, pulled out his lunch tin, and opened it. Inside was a simple meal that he had packed that morning, a thermos of tomato soup that he had made using a recipe from his grandmother, some crackers that he had bought at the station market, and a peanut butter sandwich on bread that was slightly stale but still good enough to eat. He did not look at the child, did not try to coax her out or convince her to trust him. He simply began to eat his lunch as if this was the most normal thing in the world. The child watched him through the opening of the hatch, her crying slowing as curiosity began to replace fear in her strange purple eyes. "What is that?" she asked after a long silence, and her voice was still weak, but there was something new in it, something that sounded almost like interest. "This," Marcus said, holding up the sandwich, "this is peanut butter. It comes from my homeworld, from a place called Earth, and my wife Sarah used to make these sandwiches for me every day when I worked in the mines." The child tilted her head, and for a moment she looked less like a dying princess and more like any curious child anywhere in the universe. "What is a wife?" she asked. Marcus smiled a little, and the smile was sad but also warm, the smile of a man who had loved someone very much and lost her. "A wife is someone you choose to share your life with," he said. "Someone who makes you soup when you are sick and laughs at your bad jokes and holds your hand when you are scared. Sarah was my wife for 31 years, and she was the best person I ever knew." "Where is she now?" the child asked. "She died," Marcus said simply, 2 years ago, and I miss her every single day." The child was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that made Marcus look up at her with surprise. "My Muravel died too," she whispered. "She died and I was there, and now food tastes like sadness, and I cannot make it stop." Marcus felt his heart crack open a little because he understood that pain. He understood what it meant to have grief so heavy that it made everything else impossible. "I know," he said softly. "When Sarah died, I did not eat for 3 days, and when I finally did eat again, the food had no taste at all. It was like chewing paper." "Does it still taste like paper?" the child asked. "No," Marcus said, and he took another bite of his sandwich. "It took a long time, but eventually the taste came back. And now when I eat the foods that Sarah used to make, I do not feel only sadness. I feel like she is still with me somehow, like the love is still there even though she is gone." The child did not respond, but she also did not look away, and Marcus noticed that her crying had stopped completely. He finished his lunch slowly, describing each bite to her, telling her stories about Earth and about the mines, and about the little house he and Sarah had shared in a valley where the sunset turned the sky orange and pink every evening. When his lunch tin was empty, he closed it and stood up, brushing the dust from his work clothes. "I will be here again tomorrow," he said. "Same time, same place, and I will eat my lunch again, and you are welcome to join me if you want, but if you do not want to, that is okay too." He did not wait for her to answer. He simply picked up his mop and walked away, leaving the child alone in her hiding place. But as he turned the corner, he heard her voice behind him, small and fragile but somehow stronger than before. "What is your name?" she called. He stopped and looked back at her, and she had crawled to the edge of the hatch, her thin face peering out at him from the shadows. "My name is Marcus," he said. "I am Kira," she replied, and for just a moment, so brief that he almost missed it, the faint glow beneath her scales flickered a little brighter. Then she retreated back into the darkness, and Marcus continued on his way, and neither of them knew that this small conversation in a forgotten corridor would soon change the fate of an entire empire. Marcus reported what had happened to his supervisor, because that was the responsible thing to do, and he expected nothing to come of it. Perhaps a warning to stay away from areas where he might encounter members of the royal family, perhaps a reassignment to a different section of the palace. What he did not expect was to be woken in the middle of the night cycle by 4 armed guards standing outside his small quarters in the worker dormitory. "Marcus Cole," one of the guards said, and his voice was cold and official, "you will come with us immediately." Marcus dressed quickly and followed the guards through corridors he had never seen before, corridors that grew wider and more beautiful as they climbed higher into the palace, corridors with walls of polished crystal and floors that seemed to glow with inner light. Finally, they reached a set of massive doors carved with symbols that Marcus did not recognize, and the doors opened to reveal a throne room so vast and so magnificent that Marcus had to stop for a moment just to take it all in. And there, seated on a throne that seemed to be made of captured starlight, was Queen Velara herself, ruler of the Theshan dominion, commander of 1,000 worlds, and mother of the little girl Marcus had met in the dusty crawlspace. Marcus did what seemed appropriate and knelt on the floor, pressing his forehead to the ground in the gesture of respect he had seen other workers use when speaking of the royal family. "Rise," the queen said, and her voice was neither warm nor cold, but somewhere in between, the voice of someone trying very hard to control emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Marcus stood and looked at her, and he saw that her scales had lost their glow, and he saw that her eyes were red with exhaustion, and he understood suddenly that this was not a queen looking at him but a mother, a desperate mother who had run out of options. "You spoke with my daughter," the queen said. "Yes, your majesty," Marcus replied. "I found her in a corridor near the old observatory. She was crying, and I did not know what to do, so I just ate my lunch and talked to her a little." The queen leaned forward on her throne, and her dark eyes searched his face with an intensity that made Marcus feel like she was looking directly into his soul. "She has not spoken to anyone in 6 days," the queen said. "Not to me, not to her siblings, not to the physicians or the therapists or anyone at all. And yet she spoke to you, a human janitor she had never met before. Why?" "I do not know, your majesty," Marcus said honestly. "I did not do anything special. I just sat down and ate my sandwich." Chief Physician Torvax stepped forward from where he had been standing in the shadows, and he looked at Marcus with a mixture of suspicion and reluctant curiosity. "Perhaps I should explain the situation," Torvax said. "The princess suffers from a condition we call psionic resonance trauma. 3 weeks ago her bonded nursemaid died suddenly while feeding her, and the trauma of that event created a feedback loop in the princess's mind. She now associates the act of eating with the overwhelming grief of that moment, and every time she tries to eat the grief returns so powerfully that she cannot continue." Marcus listened carefully, trying to understand. "So the food itself is not the problem," he said slowly. "The problem is what the food makes her feel." "Exactly," Torvax said. "And we have tried everything to break the loop. We have used emotional dampeners to suppress her feelings, but they weakened her psionic barriers and made the feedback worse. We have tried to feed her while she sleeps, but her mind recognizes the act of nutrition and triggers the trauma response even in unconsciousness. We have even tried to create artificial bonds with new caretakers, but she rejects them all." The queen stood from her throne and walked toward Marcus, and up close she was even more impressive, tall and elegant and radiating a power that made the air feel heavy. "My daughter is dying," she said, and her voice cracked on the word dying. "She has not eaten in 16 days now, and her body is beginning to fail, and I have done everything a queen can do. I have summoned the greatest minds in the galaxy. I have offered rewards beyond imagination, and none of it has made any difference." She stopped in front of Marcus and looked down at him, and he saw tears forming in her ancient eyes. "And then you, a human janitor with a sandwich, walked into a forgotten corridor and made my daughter speak for the first time in almost a week. So I am asking you, Marcus Cole, what did you do that we have not done?" Marcus thought for a moment, remembering the little girl in the crawlspace, remembering how she had watched him eat with such strange fascination. "I think," he said carefully, "I think maybe I just did not try to fix her." "What do you mean?" the queen asked. "Everyone who comes to see her wants something from her," Marcus said. "They want her to eat, they want her to get better, they want to solve the problem, and she can feel that, can she not? With her psionic abilities, she can feel that pressure." Torvax nodded slowly. "Yes, Thessians are highly sensitive to the intentions and emotions of those around them, especially children. So when all these people come to her wanting her to eat," Marcus continued, "she feels their expectation, and that expectation reminds her of Muravel, because Muravel was always there when she ate. And that triggers the grief all over again." The queen stared at him, and Marcus could see something shifting in her expression, something like the first faint light of hope. "But you did not want anything from her," the queen said. "No," Marcus said. "I was just a stranger eating lunch. I did not even know who she was. I just thought she was a sad kid who needed some company. So I sat down and ate my food and told her about my wife, and maybe that was different enough that it did not trigger the loop." The room was silent for a long moment, and then the queen turned to Torvax with fire in her eyes. "We have been approaching this all wrong," she said. "We have been trying to make her eat when we should have been trying to make eating feel safe again." She turned back to Marcus, and for the first time since he had entered the room she almost smiled. "Marcus Cole," she said, "I have a job for you, and I do not think you are going to like it." The queen was right. Marcus did not like it. The job was simple in description but terrifying in practice. He was to spend time with Princess Kira every day, eating his meals in her presence, talking to her, being with her, and somehow through this simple human act of companionship, he was supposed to help her learn to eat again. "What if it does not work?" Marcus asked. "What if I make things worse?" "You cannot make things worse," the queen said, and her voice was heavy with the weight of that truth. "She is dying, Marcus Cole. Anything that might save her is worth trying." So Marcus found himself walking into the royal medical chamber the next morning, with his lunch tin in his hands and fear in his heart. Princess Kira lay in her nutrient pod, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed and monitored every tiny change in her failing body. And when she saw Marcus, her eyes widened with recognition. "The sandwich man," she whispered. "That is me," Marcus said, and he pulled a chair close to her pod and sat down. "I thought maybe we could have lunch together again, if you do not mind." The physicians and caretakers who stood around the edges of the room watched with skeptical eyes, and Marcus could feel their doubt pressing against him like a physical weight. But he ignored them because this was not about them. This was about one small girl who had forgotten how to live. He opened his lunch tin and took out his thermos of soup, and the warm, familiar smell of tomatoes and herbs filled the sterile air of the medical chamber. "This is the soup I told you about," Marcus said. "My grandmother taught Sarah how to make it, and Sarah taught me, and now I make it myself every few days because it reminds me of both of them." Kira watched him but did not speak, and Marcus could see the tension in her thin body, the fear that had taken root in her heart. So he did not push. He simply began to eat, spooning the soup into his mouth slowly, savoring each bite, and as he ate he talked. He told her about Earth, about the blue oceans and the green forests and the cities that glittered at night like fallen stars. He told her about his childhood in a small town where everyone knew everyone else and the summers lasted forever. He told her about meeting Sarah at a dance when they were both 17 years old, about how she had laughed at his terrible dancing and then taught him how to do it right. He told her about their wedding, about the little house they had built together, about the daughter they had raised who was now grown and living on a colony world far away. He told her about the day Sarah got sick, about the months of hopping and praying and fighting, about the morning when she had finally let go and he had held her hand as she slipped away. And through all of this Kira listened, her purple eyes fixed on his face, and something in those eyes began to change. On the second day she asked if she could smell the soup, and Marcus held the thermos out to her and let her breathe in the warm steam. On the third day she asked about peanut butter, and Marcus explained how it was made, about the little brown nuts that grew in the ground and were crushed into paste, and she wrinkled her nose and said it sounded strange but also interesting. On the fourth day she asked to taste the soup, just a tiny sip, and Marcus held the thermos to her lips while the physicians held their breath, and she swallowed a single mouthful before pulling away. She did not cry, she did not panic. She simply looked at Marcus with wonder in her eyes and said, "It tastes like warmth." On the fifth day she ate 3 spoonfuls of soup and asked for a story about Sarah. On the sixth day she ate half a bowl of specially prepared nutrient paste while Marcus ate his sandwich beside her, and told her about the time Sarah had tried to cook a turkey for their first anniversary dinner, and had somehow set the kitchen on fire. Kira laughed, and the sound was small and rusty from disuse, but it was the most beautiful sound Marcus had ever heard. On the 7th day, the chief physician approached the queen with tears streaming down his face. "The feedback loop is breaking," he said. "Her psionic readings are stabilizing. Her body is beginning to absorb nutrients again. I do not understand how this is possible, but she is recovering." The queen came to the medical chamber that evening and stood in the doorway watching Marcus and Kira eat dinner together, the human with his simple earth food, and the princess with her Thessian nutrient paste, both of them talking and laughing as if this was the most normal thing in the galaxy. "How?" the queen whispered to Torvax. "How is a human doing what all our technology and all our expertise could not?" "Humans are communal eaters," Torvax explained, his voice filled with something close to awe. "They evolved to share meals as a form of social bonding. It is how they build trust and create emotional connections, and the princess is somehow using that connection to anchor herself." He paused and watched Marcus carefully tear his sandwich in half and offer one piece to Kira, who took it and sniffed it curiously before taking a tiny bite. "When Marcus eats," Torvax continued, "he feels safe and comfortable and happy, and his emotions are simple and stable. The princess can sense those emotions with her psionic abilities, and she is borrowing that stability. She is learning that eating does not have to mean grief. It can also mean friendship and warmth and love." The queen felt tears running down her face, and she did not try to stop them. "He is teaching her that she can eat and still miss Muravel at the same time," she said softly, "that grief and joy can exist together." "Yes," Torvax said, "and that is something we never thought to teach her, because Thessians do not eat together, we do not share meals. The concept was so alien to us that we never even considered it as a treatment option." The queen watched her daughter take another bite of the strange human sandwich and smile at Marcus with pure, unguarded trust. "Humans," she said, and there was wonder in her voice. "Such strange little creatures, and yet sometimes they understand things that we have forgotten how to see." 1 month after Marcus Cole first sat down in a forgotten corridor and ate a peanut butter sandwich in front of a dying princess, Kira was declared fully recovered. The glow had returned to her scales, bright and beautiful like moonlight on water, and her body had regained its strength, and her eyes sparkled with the mischief and curiosity that had always defined her before the tragedy that nearly took her life. But the change went deeper than just physical recovery. Kira smiled now, real smiles that reached her eyes, and she talked constantly, asking questions about everything and everyone, especially about Earth and humans and the strange, wonderful customs they practiced. And every single day, without fail, she ate her meals with Marcus by her side. The queen summoned Marcus to the throne room on the 30th day, and this time when he entered, he found not just the queen waiting for him but the entire royal court. Hundreds of Thessian nobles and officials and dignitaries gathered to witness something unprecedented. "Marcus Cole," the queen said, and her voice rang through the vast chamber with power and ceremony, "you have done something that no physician could do, no technology could achieve, and no amount of wealth could buy. You saved the life of my daughter, and for this the Thessian Dominion owes you a debt that can never truly be repaid." She gestured to an attendant, who stepped forward carrying a cushion on which rested a glittering medal and a scroll tied with golden ribbon. "I offer you the Star of Thessia, the highest honor our civilization can bestow," the queen continued. "I offer you citizenship in the Dominion with all the rights and privileges that entails. I offer you a title of nobility and lands on any world of your choosing. And I offer you wealth enough to live in comfort for 1,000 human lifetimes." The court murmured with approval because this was a fitting reward for such a service. This was how heroes were supposed to be treated, with glory and riches and recognition. But Marcus shook his head. "Your Majesty," he said, and his voice was quiet but steady, I am honored by your offer, truly I am, but I cannot accept it. The murmuring stopped, replaced by stunned silence. Why not? The queen asked, and there was no anger in her voice, only genuine curiosity. Because I did not do anything special, Marcus said. I did what any decent person would do if they found a crying child. I sat with her and talked to her and shared my food. That is not heroism, that is just being human. He paused and looked around the throne room at all the powerful beings staring at him, with confusion in their eyes. Where I come from, he continued, we have a saying that you do not need a reward for doing the right thing. The right thing is its own reward. And Kira getting better, seeing her laugh and play and eat without fear, that is more than enough for me. The queen studied him for a long moment, and then she did something that shocked the entire court. She laughed. You humans, she said, and there was affection in her voice. You are impossible to understand. You come from a small wet planet on the edge of nowhere. You have no psionic abilities, no extended lifespan, no natural weapons or defenses, and yet somehow you manage to do things that leave the rest of us speechless. She stepped down from her throne and walked toward Marcus, and when she reached him she did something that no Thessian queen had ever done before. She reached out and took his hands in hers. Very well, Marcus Cole, she said. If you will not accept wealth or titles, then let me offer you something else, a job. Marcus blinked in surprise. A job, Your Majesty. Yes, the queen said. I want you to teach my people what you taught my daughter. I want you to help us understand these human customs that seem so simple and yet contain such power. This eating together, this sharing of stories, this connection that you build through small daily acts of kindness. She squeezed his hands gently. I am offering you the position of cultural liaison for human integration, she said. Your job will be to help bridge the gap between our species, to teach Thessians the value of human traditions, and to ensure that what happened to Kira never happens to anyone else because we were too blind to see a solution that humans would have found obvious. Marcus thought about this for a moment, and then he smiled. That, he said, I can accept. The years that followed were remarkable. Marcus taught Thessian families the practice of eating together, of sharing meals as a way to strengthen bonds and create memories, and slowly the custom spread across the Dominion, changing 1,000 years of tradition in ways that no one could have predicted. He taught them about human holidays and celebrations, about the importance of marking special occasions with food and fellowship, about how a simple meal could become sacred when shared with people you loved. He taught them about grief too, about how humans learn to live with loss, not by suppressing it or fixing it, but by carrying it alongside joy, letting the two exist together like old friends. And through it all, Princess Kira stayed by his side, first as his student, then as his assistant, and eventually as his dearest friend. When historians later wrote about the great alliance between the Thessian Dominion and the Human Federation, they traced its origins not to treaties or battles or political negotiations, but to a forgotten corridor and a man with a sandwich. They wrote about how first contact between species is often dramatic and violent, full of misunderstandings and fear, but sometimes, just sometimes, it happens in the smallest and most unexpected ways. They wrote about how Marcus Cole, a janitor with a broken heart and a lunch tin, had changed the course of galactic history simply by being kind to a sad little girl. And in the final chapter of every history book, there was always the same conclusion: that humanity's greatest strength was never their technology or their numbers or their adaptability. It was their ability to sit down with strangers and share a meal, to turn enemies into friends and grief into hope through the simple act of breaking bread together. Some victories are measured in conquered worlds and signed treaties. Others are measured in peanut butter sandwiches. And those, the historians agreed, are the victories that truly matter.